All right, welcome to our career day. Teachers, if you have not given out those sheets to your seminar students, please do so. Students, make sure you attend the correct session. Don't go to a different session of what's listed. And real briefly here, I'd like to introduce Mr. Jim Richardson, and he will be speaking to you for the next few minutes about his travels.
Good, all right. Hey, thank you for having me here. I'm going to dispense with that for the moment. Yeah, thank you for having me here. Thank you for, on a day like this too, when you're actually thinking about what the heck you're going to do with your lives, all right? As I joked a moment ago, yeah, maybe I should have done that sometime in the past. But you know, I started out on the farm in Kansas, and I ended up, after a number of years, doing work for National Geographic for 35 years. So, you know, I went through about 6 majors in college before I dropped out of psychology. So, you know, I just want to say that it
to life's opportunities. So I hope I can, you know, open a few windows and doors here for you today, going over some of my work and how it played out and some of the kinds of things that I encountered all those times working for National Geographic. So I'm going to start out here, and this is called One World, Many Stories, because you end up being a storyteller when you're doing things like pictures for National Geographic. But what I encountered around the world was, yes, incredible variety, but also such recurrent themes that I learned way back when I was growing up on the farm, over and over and over. So I want to start out here assuring you that yes, I did actually come from Kansas. I grew up near Belleville, that's 90 miles north of here, on a farm. That's me when I'm 7 or 8, bucket feeding a calf. Anybody here ever bucket feed a calf? Oh, all right, you know you're a good citizen when you've done that. You know what? Bucket feeding a calf, that's our farm, you know, out there, lots of muddy roads, you know, nothing in particular. Me going off to first day of school, when I think I was in the first grade, you know, God, I got new jeans on and new shirts, new underwear. Oh man, we were all decked out. All the piles of books, the new box of crayons, all this. There's our one-room school. There was, I think that was our Christmas program. I'm the third one over from the left there in the front row, looking kind of vacuous, you know. And then I got to taking pictures because my dad was a truck driver and he drove to Texas hauling eggs, and along the way he'd stop at pawn shops and buy cameras. That's how because I always had cameras around the house, you see. So I would start taking pictures when I was 10 or 11. Things like my dog out in the front yard, pictures of the lake up in Beatrice, Nebraska. My uncle's horse was silhouetted and all this kind of stuff. And I remember taking these pictures to the county fair and sitting there in anticipation of what the judge would say and whether I'd win or not. And she got there, you know, and she started telling me and saying, oh, all these pictures are terrific. Good use of silhouetting and good use of framing and all those kind of things. And I just thought she was the greatest judge of photography ever, you know. And then, of course, so she gave me the blue ribbon, and I thought, yes, my life is made. I know where I'm going, you know. And then she went on to judge the big ears of corn and the tomatoes and the quilts, you know. So maybe she knew something about photography. At least she told me that I could do something. And turned out that's what it ended up. Even I went on lots and lots of diversions before I ever got there. Eventually, though, I got out there doing things like this, you know, the Milky Way over Natural Bridges National Monument for a story on dark skies and the loss that is due to light pollution. Ended up places like this, photographing Fingal's Cave, this basalt cave that's very famous out there in the islands off the west coast of Scotland. Or out there at Borray, what a great name for an island up in the St. Kilda group with these tens of thousands of gannets flying out of me. I think when people think about National Geographic, that's kind of what you think of. You go to adventurous places, you know, and you're out there sort of romantically carrying a camera around, finding pictures of those kind of things. Yeah, you know, and some of them, though, weren't so far away. They weren't all over the world. They were in South Dakota, like when I photographed the bison there on the Triple U Buffalo Ranch. By the way, if you've seen Dances with Wolves, the movie, that's them. That's where they filmed the movie, and so that's why I went there. But some of them were just more common, closer to home. Fireflies out on the prairie there at the Tall Grass Preserve out by Strong City, you know. But the delight of that is not just the visual delight of it. It's coming to understand the fireflies, you know, that it's kind of like they're cruising Maine, you know. The guys are up in the air flashing, you know, and the females are down in the grass and they flash back, you know, and kind of like when they make a thing, you know, they get together, you know, right? Yeah. So, it's very romantic. It's also, some of them are cannibalistic, you know, and they'll eat other fireflies. And turns out, you know, it's just kind of like a soap opera out there amongst all these insects out on the prairie, you know. It's fascinating to learn, fascinating to do that because of the exploration. So, talking to you today about the world, I want to go way back. I want to go way back 5,000 years to some of those stone circles in England and Scotland. This is up at Orkney. Orkney is an island, set of islands up there off the northeast tip of Scotland. 20,000 people and 22 inhabited islands, but they've got all these stone circles. This is probably the first stone circle in the UK. This is the stones of Stennis, and it's 700 years older than Stonehenge. So yeah, this is where they got the idea. This is where it came from. And people were changing their lives at the time. They were deciding that they were going to settle down. They weren't going to be hunter-gatherers wandering the landscape. They were going to claim the land, build monumentally, build out of stone, change the way they lived. And that's exactly what they did, putting up stone circles like Callanish out there on the Isle of Lewis, another one that's about 5,000 years old, building tombs. All of a sudden they were building tombs to their ancestors, tombs where they would bring in bones, and they would put some of the bones in each one of these little side chambers there, but not all together. You know, they didn't bring all of Uncle Bob's skeleton in. They brought his skull and his femur, and they put that over the one side there with Aunt Dorothy's toe bone, you know, and they mixed them all up. So you know they meant something, but you don't know quite what. It makes it fascinating. Nah, but they were doing this too. They were doing things like putting eagle claws in there. So this tomb became known as the Tomb of the Eagles, because all these tombs ended up having these symbols of what meant something to them. It's as if you got buried and you put your Viking sweatshirt in your grave with you, you know. It meant something to them there, you know. So, and they were building houses out of stone. This is Scar Bray. Blew out of the sand after 5,000 years in about 1850, and all of a sudden people realized, oh, there's the Stone Age village, you know, down the road, you know. But you can look at it. You see, there's a hearth in the middle, and there are beds on each side, and there's a dresser over there. When it was uncovered, there were still things like brooches and combs laying on the dresser shelves. You know, a very human sort of, not such a bad place to live, actually. You know, I've stayed in worse hotel rooms than this. You know, these were people not unlike us. They were not so different. Now you jump 5,000 years into the future, from that early beginning. The beginnings of agriculture in the Neolithic age, to flying over Chicago, and you see what has happened in the world. When you make it that kind of a time jump, you see this great expansion of the world. In Chicago, I was doing this story on light pollution, so yes, I wanted a place that really looked like it was lit up, you know. And over Chicago that night was that. But Chicago had this grid that really gives you a sense of human occupation, of the vast scale of it all. So everywhere now I go in the world, I kind of hark back to some of those ideas about where we were 5,000 years ago, and all the kinds of variations of life that we have, well, this is Carnarvon Castle. This is where Prince Charles was invested, you know, it's in Wales. Gorgeous looking old thing, about 700 years old. St. Kilda out there shows another pattern of life. This is an island out there that had, less than 200 people on all this time that anybody lived there. 40 miles out in the North Atlantic beyond the last of the islands, you know. Very difficult place to get to. And they finally, though, a melancholy story. In 1930, the last 27 residents said they couldn't carry on. And they sent out 2 ships and they evacuated them all one day. And that was the end of life on St. Kilda. So I'm fascinated every place I go in the world by these patterns of life, you know. I mean, you know, anybody who knows Photoshop knows that you could probably create that picture. But what would be missing if you created it was, gosh, there was somebody who thought putting a house between 2 rocks on the beach was a good idea, you know. It's that connection with the people and their thoughts that come through it all that is really, really interesting. Or that the people of Burano do that paint jobs on their houses. That is the most exotic looking paint jobs in any village I've ever seen, just off of Venice. So all those variations, all those ways that things happen, those towns out here on the plains that were bustling 50 to 80 years ago, now down to 2 people like Ardmore, South Dakota. Or Cuba, Kansas, that I've been photographing. It's up about 80 miles north of here. I've been photographing it for 40 years here now. And there on Saturday night, everybody's in the tavern drinking beer and having a good time, and this thunderstorm is going by outside. This exotic kind of atmosphere that even people living out here in the plains are in. You know, and then I compare that to Pennon, a little village on the coast of Scotland, where these people were moved off their land to make way for sheep. And when they moved them all down there on the coast so they would become fishermen. So, by the way, this little village is featured in a movie called Local Hero. It's really a delightful movie. I highly recommend it. So, but you can see that everywhere you go, you see these patterns of life that people somehow adapt to the local landscape. They build new patterns. You know, this is on the Aran Islands off the west coast of Ireland, you know, and you see all these fences out there. As a boy who grew up on a farm, you know, I would see them, they would have cattle in those little pastures. And I go, you know, I don't see a gate. How the heck are you getting the cattle in there? And the guy tells me, oh, he says, you take down the stones and you put the cattle in and you put the stones back up. That's it, you know. Oh, I say, oh, okay. I guess things don't have to work the way they do back home, you know. So you get to this sense that there's all these exotic places. Machu Picchu there in Peru, you know, is as exotic as it gets probably up there on the ridge. You know, it's a gorgeous looking place. We ran this picture in National Geographic, and then we were doing a print sale of it, you know, through the. And when we ran this, it was really quite fun. This picture particularly, when I was up there and the llamas came by and, like, you know, got in my way. But of course they didn't get in my way, they made the picture, you know. So we ran that picture, we were doing a print sale of it, and I saw on Twitter one day, a woman posted this. Ollie Garfinkel, she says, so disappointed after seeing this photo and realizing that that's a third llama in the back and not the arm of the right llama ringing a little bell. Okay, go back, okay? You see it? Doesn't it kind of look like she's ringing a little bell? Okay, so that got 22,000 shares on Twitter when she did that. 22,000 shares, okay? And then somebody else came along and did this little cartoon, you know, of it, and that really is the right llama ringing a little bell, and he's saying, oh, Barnaby, stop looking at that drab matchu, whatever it is, and bring me my tea and crumpets. That got 10,000 more shares on Twitter, you know? The delight of it was, of course, seeing this exotic place, but also realizing that it could connect to our world. Those people's lives should somehow connect with us and the way we see things, and the humor would come out of it. It was just absolutely great fun. So All those stories, that's kind of what I've been looking for. I've been looking for those places, for instance, where, you know, I could get a sense when I was doing a Great Plains story, a sense of the distance, you know? A sense of, so I went looking, I drove a lot of miles looking for that row of telephone poles out there in Colorado. 7 miles of them, you know, it was the perfect place. And then standing there waiting a long, long time for some pickup to come down the road, you know, and you can't quite see it, but the dog is sitting in the right-hand side of the pickup, you know, which is my little extra thought about that whole picture. But all of those things, that we think of places like Machu Picchu as being exotic, but we don't necessarily think of the things in our backyard as being exotic. Somebody around the world sure does. When they see Gwen and Josh Hoy out there burning the tall grass prairie of the Flint Hills, you know, on horseback, you know, that's exotic to a lot of people. It was great fun because I thought this was, you know, they're going along on horseback and they don't have some fire stick or something. They got a box of matches. And they're just riding along, and they would strike a match and throw it in the grass, and ride along and strike a match and throw it in the grass, you know. And I thought, yeah, I'd kind of like to do that. That'd be kind of fun to do, wouldn't it, you know? So the ranchers, of course, up at the Haythorne Ranch, when they got together for branding, they would go out for 30 days doing this branding. But before that, they would always make sure that they had a new shirt, they had new suspenders, they had the best hats, you know. They were getting ready for branding season because they were going to be real cowboys out there in the sandhills of Nebraska. We sell a lot of that card, I must say. Okay, yeah. But it was a real privilege there, being there with Craig Haythorne when he'd be roping the horses in the morning, to be out there in that vastly beautiful place at that moment with that person who had such a personal relationship with the place. Learning that was like learning about the fireflies, learning this relationship and how much it could mean to people. I grew up on a farm. I understood what these guys felt when a storm was coming in up there in Nebraska, you know. And seeing it come in, and everybody sort of gets that picture. They understand immediately the sense of awe. They also understand that we're not, when it comes to the weather, we're not always in control. So that's ended up being what it's about. I told National Geographic when I was doing this story in the Flint Hills that I get a picture of a tornado, and I didn't. But I did get this. I did get this storm thundering through, which was almost better because it had the sense of being there, of what it's like to be out in the middle of one of those storms. That storm was gone in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. It was going so fast coming through there. You can even see a little bit of blue coming in the sky up there. But you should understand too, this is just as exotic. It's just as exotic as any place else in the world for somebody. And it's such a treasure to have right here in our town. Midsummer's coming up here in Lynchburg. I hope we'll get to do it again. Or Lucia there at Christmas. Somebody in the world looks at those pictures and believes that this is a really exotic, cool place. And it is. Yeah, I got to tell you that. So realize too that wherever I go in the world, I see dance groups. So we have the Swedish dancers here. You go to Easter Island, and they have a Polynesian dance group that performs for tourists, and people come, keep those traditions going. You go to Rwanda, and there's the youth dance group there that comes out and does much the same kind of thing, you know. So all those kind of things, we're really doing things that are firmly based in human needs, and those kind of things, if it's truly important to people, it will probably happen almost everywhere. So the kinds of things that motivate you are very much the same kind of things that motivate people all over the world. If you go to Venice, the dresses are pretty nice, I will say that, when they do the festival there, and they're carrying the Marie candidates down the procession, down to the plaza at San Marco. You know? And it's really exotic, but it's still essentially the same thing as Midsummer's in Lynchburg in a different place. If you go to the Highland Games in Scotland, the guys will be out there on that day of the games in their kilts, and boy, they are dressed up, and they are just like the cowboys in the sandhills of Nebraska. They're playing the part. They're enacting who they want to be. They are living the life that they want to live. When you start pulling these things together and you see them side by side, there I am in Dushanbe in Tajikistan, up in a tree, looking down at the men who gathered every afternoon for tea out in the courtyard. And they share the usual sorts of gossip that everybody does. The same kind of stuff that those ranchers shared around the stock tank when they were coming back in from branding out there in the sandhills of Nebraska. The ways that people make themselves feel united, the way they say who they are, the kind of costumes they put on to do that. The Royal Canadian Mounties there, very proper, you know. I got this picture because the guys were just standing there and I said, oh, you know, your hat's a little crooked. It wasn't a little crooked. I just wanted him to do something. So he got his hat and he was going to make darn sure it was on straight. And he comes there and he swipes his hand back and he does all that. Those kind of little rituals that tell us, you know, how people think about themselves. Is the same kind of rituals that you see if you're in Papua New Guinea, the guys who get together there. And while it looks to us like they are all wearing the same costume, they aren't. If you look at their headdresses, they're all individual. They're very much the same, but they've all done something different that they mean to express their individuality within that group of people. Great guys, actually. And then you get to all the other kinds of displays of the ways that we live our lives, the way we express our beliefs. You know, if you go to the Lady Chapel in Westminster Abbey, yeah, you can see that they put a lot of money into this in the Middle Ages. You know, that's all stonework, and it is so gorgeous. And you think about that, all that stonework up there being held up on those fingers of stone. You know, it's really extraordinary craft. Or you see this. This is just St. Govan's Church, a little chapel, carved back into the cliff face on the site of a Celtic holy well on the coast of Wales. Or Tapram Temple in Cambodia. Anybody see Tomb Raiders? Yeah, okay, well that's the place, right? Yeah, that's the place where they filmed it. The temple got buried in the jungle, and over the years the trees grew up, and now you can't take the trees down because the temple holds up the trees and the trees hold up the temple. They're married now after all that time, but it has just this great organic sense of life intertwined, you know, which I've always been looking for. So you find all these weird, sometimes totally weird ways of people express that kind of stuff. Of course, the pyramids and the Sphinx there at Giza, outside of Cairo. But also Easter Island, you know, those moai, those statues that were meant to represent their ancestors. And actually, the ones that you see up on the hill here are ones that got carved but never moved into position. Because what they really did is they took them down to the shore, and their little segment of the island would get demarcated by a row of these statues to their ancestors back there. That kind of sentiment, you can go out to the cemetery outside of Lynchburg here, and you go and you look at the big obelisk there for Coral Aaron Franson. You know, yeah, we're doing the same kinds of things in our own patterns, in our own way. You go to the Taj Mahal, which is actually a tomb of devotion for the leader of the country at the time, in about 1600, to his wife. That's a mausoleum for her. It's gorgeous. But what I found fascinating was usually you see, when you go there, you see the Taj Mahal, or you see pictures of it, you know, and it's just this beautiful bit of architecture. But if you go there on a Sunday afternoon, all these Indian people come out, and everybody comes out, and they come to the Taj Mahal, and they walk around with their families, and they take pictures of each other in front of the Taj Mahal, and they sit down, they have their picnic lunch out there in front of it. It's a very human place. I think that's an important thing to remember. Or being on the Ganges there at Varanasi, where everybody goes out in the boats. They come down in the morning, they bathe in the Ganges, you know, ancient river of great tradition. But the traditions may be different from different places, but they generally come from the same fundamental feelings that we all have. The way it plays out in the world, though, is fascinating. You know, here was a clearing in a woods in France and Brittany. It was an oak tree in the middle of a clearing. That would have been, Druids would have used this as a holy site. That tree is very, very old. They probably used that tree perhaps, but it then got converted into a Catholic shrine by putting up all that statuary on the tree. So it's been a grand adventure just going around and seeing all those kinds of ways that people make these things happen in their lives. The Beltane Fire Festival there in Edinburgh, which is very much an old, ancient, Celtic, pagan kind of festival, you know. Going to Stonehenge on the summer solstice, you know, and seeing that there were 20,000 people there, and for 19,500 of them, it was a big party, and for 500 people, like this couple, it was a supremely serene and spiritual moment. The ways we celebrate that stuff. Carhenge in Alliance, Nebraska, you know, a copy of Stonehenge made out of cars. Anybody been there? Oh, you gotta, if you go to Alliance, Nebraska, you gotta go out in the cornfield, out to Carhenge. The kind of little rituals that we build into our lives. Harvest, this is wheat harvest out in western Kansas. The harvest in China, we all end up feeling that excitement that comes with harvest, which has been only 10,000 years in our history since the beginning of agriculture. We're harvesting potatoes up there at 14,000 feet in the Andes. These young women were hauling firewood back 10 kilometers each way to their village. You know, 7 miles hauling firewood each day. So every once in a while you get into some of these little moments like this. This family getting breakfast before the kids would go off to school in Africa. The boy there picking up the goat, seeing the relationship. Look on that little square on the wall back there. The kids have been doing their math homework in chalk on that metal window. Yeah. So all those kind of things, and a direct relationship. This boy hauling 2 puppies from 2 litters so I could see him. You know, it was just one of the most exciting moments I've ever seen. You know, so everywhere you go and you start pulling these things together, you start seeing the kinds of relationships that are universal in our world. Going out there with the Lawrence McEwen, the Laird of Muck, a medieval laird. He's still a medieval landowner there up on his island off the west coast of Scotland, blowing us away. He fixed me with that eagle eye, and then his dog came up and he reached up and petted the dog. And there was this whole scene all together. Larry and Pauline Butler, lighthouse keepers off the west coast of Scotland, holding the picture of their family. I asked them, I said, "Who's that?" And they said, "No, that's our children." I said, "How many?" He said, 14. 14 kids at the lighthouse. Larry joked. He said, "What else are you going to do at a lighthouse?" Yeah, well, okay. Yeah. So, the kinds of entertainment we do, the Highland games that they pull off and do these strange things, the kinds of costumes we wear when we go out, you know, deer stalking in Scotland, or going out and doing the racing gigs in the evenings there around St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall, or Memorial Day at Copper Canyon on the Colorado River. You see these kind of things over and over and over again in the world. No Smiling Day at the Edinburgh Festival. They were funny as hell. They were just absolutely great. And the little things. I tend, every place I go, to try and get a haircut somewhere in the world. So if I'm in Ireland and I find a barber shop, I go get a haircut there. I did it here in Xinjiang province of China. And of course, I didn't let them scrape my head. That's an Islamic thing for that kid. And that was his grandfather, and you can tell that kid's not all that happy about what's going on here. That village, though, they let me into their lives. I was only there for 2 days, but they let me into it. I went to the barber shop, and you just saw all that. When I went into the barber shop, you know, there was lots of light. And then it got darker and darker and darker, and I looked over at the window, and the whole window had filled up with people staring in at me, because I was the oddball there. I was the weird one, you know, out of this whole thing. But they absolutely made the picture. Going out in the morning when they were coming into town for market, and seeing that little boy, you see him back on behind his father's shoulder there, looking over his shoulder at this strange guy from Kansas, you know, out there with his big telephoto lens. Going to the baker, you know, where they were making that incredible bread in fire pit ovens, or to a silk factory, you know, and with a young woman who would tease the silk out of the cocoons, you know, from the mulberry trees. The daycare center, you know, so wherever I go, you end up finding all these things that are so universal to us in our experience, but so varied and so rich and so many things to do. And yet, I don't have to tell you that that's a love letter. You know it, don't you? Her boyfriend sent that to her from someplace. They're sharing it. You know that's a universal language of what is happening there. In that place where they spent all that time making those beautiful rugs, hand weaving them. This woman thought I was great fun. We shared about 10 minutes together. I, of course, didn't speak Uyghur at all, and she didn't speak English. But she had a great deal of fun. I had a great deal of fun. I know that there was something that passed between us because we had that moment together, even if we didn't speak the same language. It was great. I went to the dentist there, a man who had a foot-powered drill. You know, like an old sewing machine treadle. He would pull this over. The guy is sitting on a box on a wood floor. He's pumping up and down with his feet, you know, driving this thing. The bit looks like he got it at the hardware store from Bob, you know, that big around, you know. Oh, it just was terrible, you know. He's drilling away in this thing. Remarkable. But the guy seemed to be pretty happy with the job when it was all done, you know. It was the best dentist shop I've ever seen, I absolutely must say. But the universal thing of being out in that village along the Silk Road of Western China is when this young woman came up with her baby and wanted me to get a picture of her. They wanted to share family. They wanted to share those relationships. They wanted to see who they are. I think that's a universal thing all around the world. People want us to know who they are. I never felt as safe as amongst those people, I must say. They were really quite wonderful. So to finish up here, just one last thing. Off in Scotland one time, I wanted to photograph one of these things where the guys haul sheep out to an island for summer grazing. And I was in my hotel doing some work, and I got a phone call, and it says, go see Johnny Buchanan, he's hauling sheep out to the little island of Abbey. So I went down there. They were handing over sheep into this 150-year-old boat. And I want you to watch that lamb on the front thwart there, okay? Because he's going to make a break for it. Going to make me a break for it. And then he was in the water. And I love Johnny's expression of kind of gaping after the thing, you know. I can tell you that no lambs were harmed in the filming of this sequence. They fished it out, you know. But it always represents to me the serendipity of discovery that we all have ahead of us if we're out there and looking for it. I envy you at your age with all of that lies in front of you, and a day like this to think about it. So thank you for letting me share all that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Richardson. We appreciate you being here.
Oh, good to be here. Thank you.
What great pictures.
Well, you do it for 35 or 50 years, you should get some.
At this time, seniors, you'll be going to the auditorium. Juniors, it says on your sheet you go to a classroom, but you will be going to the gymnasium. Sophomores and freshmen, you'll go to your class sponsors. We will start those sessions at 1 o'clock. Thanks again, Mr. Richardson.
Thank you very much.
Everybody know where they're going?